Well, folks, it's time to fire it up on a super Sunday afternoon. Why? Because we've got the one and only LynAnn Weaver in the house. What's going on?
Hey, hey.
Hey, what are you most grateful for today?
Ooh, I love that question. Today, honestly, I am grateful for health. I'd spent the last several days a little sick, and it's just such a good reminder of how important our health is for everything that we do and energy, vitality, success. And without it, it can be pretty miserable. So
Yeah,
I'm very grateful for that today.
yeah, yeah. I remember you saying as you showed up, you had a little cough or something,
Yeah.
and it wipes you out.
Fine.
It wipes you out,
We're getting it.
right?
It does.
Yeah, I had that about 3 weeks ago. I didn't even want to take a phone call.
Yep.
I was so dead.
That was how my last week was too.
Right. Oh, well.
Although I rallied, sometimes you just got to push through it.
Mhm.
And, that mind over matter piece, it is amazing how much it can kick in. But then the next day I was out of commish.
Smoke.
Mm-hmm.
You push yourself, and then you're like,
I did. Well, I had a client call. I had a former executive that I'd been working with call me. And so in those situations, it's what's going to be in their best interests. And then I'm just going to rally and figure it out.
yeah.
And then sleep the next day.
Sleep. Underrated.
Very much so.
Yeah. Yeah. We had a guest speaker for the Elite League International Mastermind group that I host.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the biggest topic of conversation. He was talking about how important sleep is. I said, what is the number one thing for productivity? He goes, sleep.
Oh, yeah.
And then we went into this 30-minute conversation about it.
Yeah, there's a couple of Olympic athlete training programs that that is one of their protocols. They require their athletes to be sleeping 8 to 10 hours a night.
They force them.
That's the recommendation. I don't know that you can truly force somebody, because if you're not mastering, shutting down your mind and doing all of the appropriate things to be able to get the best sleep possible, that's when those nights of restlessness come in, you wake up at 2 a.m. or just not able to fall asleep.
That's really good.
There's a ton of different protocols to follow to be able to get back into a really restful state if needed.
And, if you look at it, if the pros are doing it, we should probably be doing it.
Why would you not? Right.
Yeah. And why don't we look at ourselves in different facets as professionals, right? We're sure we might not be a professional. What was the sport?
It was an Olympic training program. It was a podcast.
We know might be Olympians, yet why don't we treat ourselves as professional life doers?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what does it actually look like to live life professionally? I mean, I think that we'd have to take a lot of different things seriously that we might not right now.
Absolutely.
Sleep's one of them. And then food.
Mm-hmm.
Spirituality, perhaps. That's always helpful. Studies say. Yeah. What else? What else is there?
Mastering productivity.
Mm.
But first and foremost, clarity.
Mm-hmm.
What actually are your goals in life, in this particular area of business that you're focused on, in the relationships that you have, bringing intentionality into those areas? Because if we don't have clarity on it, we just fall into this trap of reacting to whatever comes. And that's where people often feel like a victim of their own circumstance, because they're not actively planning their life. They're not actively planning their career. They're taking what comes and reacting to it.
Yeah. So there's two principles that come to mind. One is clarity is power. Mm-hmm. The second one is start with the end in mind.
Absolutely.
Now, we're hosting a workshop about the mindset between a billionaire and a millionaire.
Ooh, I love it.
Yeah. And apparently, says ChatGPT that most billionaires think that they look at their ancestors, not their ancestors, but their descendants' lives, not just their life.
Yeah.
They think that far into the future.
Yeah.
That's thinking well ahead as far as the end goes. Most people think 5 years. They said average millionaire thinks 5 years out. Yeah.
Average company does too.
The average
What are strategic planning timelines? Usually 1 year, 3 year, 5 year. Some will extend it into 10, but very few are planning beyond that.
Why?
That's a great question. Because if you're really looking at leaving a legacy, which is what a lot of the billionaires are thinking, is how is what I'm doing today going to leave a lasting impact for tomorrow? I think a lot of organizations, so my background is in healthcare, and what we would see is the average length for an administrator to stay in their role was less than 5 years. A lot of the C-suite that I know bounce around every 2 to 3.
Yeah.
If you're lucky, you're staying 5. And so why would you plan for something when you're not going to be there? And your metrics and ability to climb the ladder are dependent on what outcomes you produce today. And I just had a conversation with a couple different physicians that I used to work with who are now in leadership positions. And they're saying one of our biggest struggles is our leadership turns over so frequently that they're all short-term focused. How do we get to convince them that we need to be doing what's right for the long term rather than the short term? And that's where some of those differences come into play. But the most successful individuals are doing exactly what those billionaires are. There's a reason they're a billionaire, right?
Yeah.
Like, they're projecting out what their actions today are going to lead to and who it's going to impact tomorrow, because that's where longevity comes into play. That's where we stay connected to our purpose and our passion. And when we stay connected to that, you see a decrease in burnout. You see an increase in productivity. You see an increase in the joy that you get from what you're being able to deliver, because you know that you're giving. You're not just in it to receive. And that changes our interaction and how we think, how we show up, like what actions we're actually taking and the outcomes that we get.
Yes. Well said. And when we look at the comparison between somebody's company versus how they treat themselves, do we typically see a stark contrast, or I guess my question is, how close are they versus how they treat their company and how they treat themselves? For example, their personal finances versus their business success. Are they like one and the same? Do you notice the people that plan 5 years out for the company are also just planning 5 years out for themselves as well? Or do you see a difference in those two segments?
That's a very interesting question. And I want to dissect this a little bit.
Please.
Because there's a common saying that how I do anything is how I do everything. But in that example that you just gave, so when I say how I do anything is how I do everything,
which I've heard, and then I've also heard somebody say that's not true, because you're not going to clean your house as good as a professional cleaner. And so you might not even care about that, but you could, right. You know what I mean? Oh, go ahead. Yep.
Exactly. In that instance, as I reflect on some of the people that I've worked with, as well as just my own experience, how often is it that you work as hard for you as you do for somebody else? How often do you keep your word to yourself as often as you will for somebody else? So, for example, I know I need to exercise. I know I need to get sleep. I know I have this project due. This impacts more people. So I'm going to sacrifice what I told myself I was going to do so that I can hold myself accountable to this, because my word to myself really doesn't matter that much. Now, if we reframe our relationship to our word, so how integrous am I? How I show up in my personal life, how much I keep my word to myself and do what I say I'm going to do for me, now can start to equate to exactly what you do to keep your word to other people. And that's where we see that shift in health, energy, vitality, improved sleep. And it actually starts to kind of create the snowball effect of where now you're doing what you know you need to do to be the best version of you, which guess what? When you bring the best version of you to this now increases exponentially as well.
By default.
By default. Because if you're doing the things that are necessary for what we call true high performance, achieving higher levels of sustained success over the long term without sacrificing health, well-being, and positive relationships.
Health, well-being, positive relationships.
Yes. That's when we actually level up personally so that we can level up professionally. And if you look at, the personal finances versus professional finances, I've definitely spoken to several people, some of whom work in finance, who are like, oh yeah, my budget at work is on point. Like, I can tell you down to the penny what we're spending on X, Y, or Z, what our, financial projections are. And then you talk to them about personal finances, and it's, how about we steer back over to this conversation, because I'm not comfortable there, because I actually don't know, or I haven't put as much effort and focus on that as what I do at work. And so it's really first doing that self-assessment of, am I bringing the same version of me to everything that I do? Or am I finding that I sacrifice more personally so that I can achieve more professionally, even though I know when I'm sacrificing personally, I'm not actually achieving the same level of success I could professionally if I didn't sacrifice here.
I've heard so many times that it starts with self, right? How do you teach that to somebody? What does that actually mean, that it starts with self? Okay, now what?
And how do one of my favorite questions is, how do you teach somebody how to win the game that they don't even know that they're playing? And that's the game of self. How do you teach self-awareness to somebody who's not self-aware?
Whoa. How?
Question of the day, right?
Yeah.
Some of it comes to a person's willingness to do some self-discovery. We are in a society where we're trained to be busy all the time. How are you doing today? Oh, I'm so busy. Is that not the word that like everybody says?
Yeah. Now, on a side note, for those that are listening, I choose not to use that word because basically all I hear is that you don't know how to manage your time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or I feel like I'm now victim to everything else coming to me.
Right.
And it's an easy way to say, I can't even think about what I'm doing right now because it's just easier to use when we're busy.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I sit with myself, observe my thought patterns, observe? So when we look at outcomes, the actions that we take, and then the outcomes that we get, it all comes from first the belief that we have about whatever we're doing, about the people, the environment, the situation, what's possible or not. And that comes from past experiences, the beliefs that we formulated about those, the meanings that we give to those, any situation or interaction that we have. And then when we look at why we believe something. So give me an example of a client that you've worked with, or just an example of somebody that you've interacted with, of where you knew that something more was possible for them, but there was one thing that you saw them doing continuously that was kind of getting in their way.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I have a accountability partner in real estate who lives in another state. And her conversation with herself was constant excuses for literally every single topic that I brought up. There was an excuse being made, which I called her out on.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Is she a little bit of a perfectionist?
Oh, no, I wouldn't say so.
Okay.
But I think she's a little set in the ways.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and the excuses were what kind of excuses?
One thing was menopause.
Okay.
The emotional waves getting in the way of things. Another thing was busy with client work, right? And there was a third one I just don't remember.
Okay.
But they were all three different categories.
And it was keeping her from heading
into her conversation goals for the week.
Her conversation goals for the week.
Yeah.
Okay.
Her number one priority. The week before I said, what is your number one thing? Such that by doing so, everything else becomes irrelevant or unnecessary. And it was having 20 conversations a day. The number one thing. And she didn't do it. And that's where I was met with. Why not?
Gotcha.
Because of this. Oh, because of that. And because of that. Yeah.
More than likely what drives a situation like that.
Yeah.
So I'll back up a little bit further. The reason that most people fail at achieving their goal, their conversation goal, comes down to fear, frustration, fatigue, or feeling all alone. And what I mean by that is lack of community. So you don't have the support around you. You don't see something that is possible because somebody else has accomplished it. You've heard I'm sure everybody has heard you are the sum of the 5 people that you spend the most time with.
It's true.
Right? Because that becomes our belief system. We see what they're capable of achieving. We hear their limitations that they either speak or act or don't. If you start to look at your income level and compare it to the people that you hang around with most, more often than not, you're not very far apart.
Right.
And there's a reason for that. When I hear you talk about your coworker, accountability partner.
Yeah.
Thank you. Underlying not doing outreach and then making excuses often comes down to the first half of fear. Fear of failure or fear of success.
Dang.
And so either, like, you know, what's talked about more frequently is, oh, I'm afraid that if I try something, I'm not going to succeed or I'm going to get rejected. That is, you know, very prominent fear.
For sure.
But what I see, and especially our high performers or high achievers, people with really good potential and people who've had decent levels of success, is they're actually afraid of succeeding so much that they don't know how to actually continue and maintain it. And so that fear of success is actually what stops them.
How do they get past that?
I mean, we look at it kind of individually, but as a
I know.
as a general rule, one thing that you could do is actually sit down and say, okay, so dissect, why am I afraid of this? What is really stopping me? Again, sitting with self. Gaining that self-awareness.
It starts with self.
Starts with self. Why am I not taking these actions? You can write down the excuses, label them however you want. But beyond the excuses of, oh, it's menopause or it's this or it's that, which there is a big part of emotional regulation in there. And when you're having all of these emotional swings, and you've probably seen this too, when you have conversations with somebody and you're not in the best energetic state, how do they go?
Oh, I was at the Soho House a couple weeks ago, and I just wanted to be left alone. And my buddy was entertaining these two women who were like 15 years younger than us, and she kept saying repeatedly, "Are you calling me old?" Because I thought she was older than she was. She told me to guess, and she said it 15 times. And then I gave her a hard time, and then guess what? She got up and left. I'm like, look, I'm not in the mood. I didn't want to talk. Plus, you're asking me the same question 15 times. I'm going cross-eyed over here. Anyways, yeah, it didn't go well.
Exactly.
Okay.
So you've had those experiences, right?
Yeah, 2 weeks ago.
What kind of belief can that form for experiences like that in the future? It can say, okay, so if I'm in a mood and I talk to somebody, probably not going to go well.
Yes.
That's the meaning that I'm going to give any potential outreach that I do. So if I'm emotionally deregulated or not able to effectively regulate my emotions to get into a positive state of where I know that the conversation would go well, why would I set myself up for failure? But what we want to do is actually look at the reason behind the why.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
okay, if I'm,
That's good.
you know, I'm not a menopause expert, just going to...
Me either. Look, and the only reason I even brought that up is because you asked me what she said. That's where she said.
No, and I appreciate that. But when you look at what you can control in those situations of, okay, so I'm having hot flashes or I'm feeling really irritable. Most females can relate to this. There are certain times of the month where our emotions are a little bit less easily regulated. What else impacts that? Sleep, nutrition, hydration, sunlight, exercise, mental toughness. What are my thought processes? What am I thinking about this current situation?
Internal
dialogue.
Yeah.
Because when we don't actually set an intention of how I'm going to respond to this thing, that's where our processes just automatically go into whatever habit has been formed. So whatever automaticity is there. And if we look at that, instead of saying, okay, I know that I'm, going through menopause, I have emotional fluctuations, or we'll take it outside of the menopause thing. We'll just say I'm having an emotional, I'm in a mood. I'm having some emotional irregularity. What can I do to get into a better state so that I can regulate my emotions better? Do I need to go do a non-sleep deep rest, which puts you in the brainwave state of deep rest so that you get the rejuvenation from it without actually spending 8 hours sleeping? I do that in the middle of the day if I'm going into a really important meeting and I'm feeling sluggish, or before I have a conversation that's incredibly impactful. Like when I was not feeling very well and I knew I had a meeting with one of my clients and he's in a time crunch, so there wasn't the opportunity to extend or move the date. I did an NSDR immediately before we got on the
What'd you call it?
a non-sleep deep rest, or NSDR. Other places will call it yoga nidra. And what that does is it really just gives your nervous system a reset. And so it helps put you into the neurochemical state that's going to be more effective for what you're doing. You can more easily regulate it.
Is that on YouTube?
Oh, yeah. They're all over.
NSDR?
NSDR.
Cool.
I'll send you some of my favorite ones.
Thank
There's hundreds of them, different lengths and times.
Yeah, but we want the best ones.
Well, best is dependent on whose voice you enjoy.
Foolish. We're an amateur.
No, I'm sure that there are some that probably aren't as great as others, but I'll send you a handful of them.
Thank you.
Very fun. So looking at things like that, so sleep has been disrupted because of whatever reason. How do I get back that energy? How do I either make sure that I'm setting myself up for better rest, or how do I make sure that I'm doing things like an NSDR in the middle of the day if I'm not sleeping very well, so that I can make sure that I'm more on top of my emotional regulation? What thoughts am I thinking about the situation? Am I thinking, oh, here it goes again? Or am I thinking, okay, I'm recognizing a pattern. I'm feeling that I'm in a mood, or I'm off, or I'm irritable. What do I need to think about now so that I can actually bring myself back to a place that's going to be more effective for what I'm doing? One of the greatest ways to do this is actually through breath work. And so when we look at some of the research, there was actually a study done out of Harvard called the Happiness Advantage. And they found that people who are in a positive neurochemical state, so one that we would consider joy, excitement, happiness, they are up to 31% more productive, 37% better at sales, and 19% faster at determining an accurate answer than those who are in a negative or even a neutral neurochemical state.
For sure.
For sure. So when we're having conversations with other people, or we're interacting with, a potential client, or, a really important meeting, being in a positive neurochemical state is crucial to getting your best outcome. So after doing an NSDR, I'll usually do a deep breathing exercise, bringing myself back to that baseline, and then do a visualization of putting myself in a really peaceful place, and then visualize what is the ideal outcome I want, and how can I bring myself to this conversation so that I can achieve that ideal outcome. What tone do I use? What body posture do I use? What is the energy that I'm projecting? How do I speak? What words do I use? What is that person's potential objection, or why they may not want something? And then how can I help show them through the way that I speak to them that we can actually help them achieve whatever they're really wanting without said objection?
Reminds me of the power of a reset.
Mm-hmm.
Scratch that. It doesn't remind me of that, but what I think of is a power of a reset.
Power of a reset.
Yeah. And then Brendan Burchard.
Yes.
He does resets, quote unquote.
Every 50 minutes.
How long?
50.
Every 50 minutes. And his there's some somewhat physical, somewhat breathing and stretching and stuff like that. And NSDR is a reset, right?
Yes.
And the cool part is you can do these. You have the choice to do these when you want to.
Yes.
When you need to. Do you ever feel like you're doing more but receiving less financially, energetically, spiritually? AUREA is here to change that. This 2-day immersive summit in Austin on April 17th through 18th, 2025 brings together visionary leaders to help you unlock hidden truths, clear energetic blocks, and amplify your wealth and wisdom. If you're ready for real transformation, visit austin.aurealeaders.com or check the link in the description to learn more. Huge thanks to AUREA for sponsoring this episode. Now, let's get back to it. Now, taking on the whole, would you say that we overcomplicate things far too often as people?
Humans tend to overcomplicate.
Yeah, I think so too. With that being said, keeping it simple, right? I wrote down a note here. Keeping it simple controlling the controllables. There's only just a handful of things that we can actually control. Your thoughts, what you think, what you say, what you do, and there's another one. What you think, what you say, what you do. Maybe those are it. Not much. But again, it's very simple, and you get to choose it. So let's tap into the power of choice.
Yeah.
The power of choice.
Let's go there.
Yeah, I heard something this morning that if you're listening to this, you chose your physique.
Very true.
You chose your bank account.
Very true.
You chose your life, socioeconomic status.
Yep.
It's all a choice.
It is.
Isn't that right?
It is.
So when it comes to keeping things simple and focusing our attention on these very small amount of things, right? Such as our thoughts, stuff like that. What practices can we actually implement every day to make sure that we stay on track with focusing on those simple, small things? How do we do it?
I love that question too. You're really good at this. One of my favorite ways to do this is journaling. And I know that journaling has a lot of hype out there. Everybody says, oh, just write down things and, put whatever's on paper, which is great. I like to bring a little bit more intentionality to it. And when we look at setting intentions, what outcome am I wanting from this conversation, from my day? Like, what am I really trying to create?
Start with the end in mind.
Start with the end in mind. I'm not just talking about, okay, I want to have 20 conversations with people. It's what feeling do I want to create in those 20 conversations?
Dang, that's small. That's as small as we can get, as granular as we can get, which we want.
Yeah.
We like that.
Dive down even more too. It's people, I mean, you know this, people buy based off of emotion.
Yeah.
They stay committed to their decision based off of logic, but we have to spark emotional connection first. So in every interaction, how do I want to be? And then what do I need to do to bring the best version of me to that situation?
So if we were to draw a funnel, you have conversations here. And then below that you have, what would go underneath that? You have conversations, like let's say you have 20 conversations, then the feeling of what you want to feel in the conversation, and then
what's the outcome?
The outcome
that I want. Yeah.
Awesome.
And then behind that is, what do I actually need to believe to make that outcome a reality? What do I need to believe about me, about the situation, about the environment, etc.?
Because that's energy.
That is energy. Because we project our belief onto everything that we do.
100%.
You will feel, consciously or subconsciously, depending on how emotionally intuitive you are, what I believe is the outcome. So if I believe that I'm going into a sales conversation of I'm pushing something on them that I don't really want to, I'm kind of that sleazy used car salesman, I'm that, something negative, I don't have a really great relationship with the word sales, for example. Guess what every person feels that you talk to? As then you wonder why you don't sell. So what do I need to believe about me, about the situation, about what I'm presenting, so that I can get this outcome? Well, if that outcome is, I want to make sure that I'm helping a family find their dream home and we're able to make a sale, okay, I need to believe first and foremost that I'm actually helping them, that I'm capable of finding them something that is going to just make them exceptionally happy, and that the outcome that I'm delivering is worthy of the value exchange, i.e. money, that they're going to be paying me.
Come from contribution is a principle that comes up. Yeah. And again, it starts with self. You got to get your mind right.
Right.
Yeah. It starts with you. How are you going to tap into that state on game day? And in business, pretty much every day is game day. It doesn't stop.
No. It does not. So
this means you got to do more work on yourself because it's every day.
Yeah. So emotions, what emotions do I want to create? what belief do I need to have about those?
Yeah.
And then what action am I going to take to make sure that this happens? So how and when am I scheduling in my calendar and actually following it? Doing the actions that are necessary to be able to get the result that I want.
And it's choice to do that.
It's choice.
We can do it.
Yeah. You
Every
could
day.
be busy with 100 other things. Like I could be busy nonstop. There are 5,000 things that are constantly vying for time, distractions, conversations. Oh, the dishes need to be done. I need a vacuum. Well, I was doing something, but it wasn't the something. And when we look at people who often find those other things to do to be busy, they want to feel productive, but there's usually an underlying fear that's stopping them from moving forward in the area that they're really needing to focus on.
Yeah, don't mistake busy for achievement.
Very true.
You like that one?
I do.
Thought you would. That's cool. Wow. Holy mackerel, this is great. I wrote down another thing here. When you talk about the 5 people that you surround yourself with, I personally find myself on edge about this principle,
Okay.
stressed about the principle,
Okay.
because it's a lonely road. Because I know what I'm capable of, which is abundance. It's mass success. I know this. Yet, the people that live right down the street, the people that are cool to hang out with, they're fun, they're successful, I would say, they're a higher tier for sure. Yet, the conversations are not talking about where I'm talking about, where I'm thinking and believing about. Those people might be a little bit harder to reach, harder to build that network with, harder to embed myself in their circle. So it's lonely.
Yeah.
It's lonely. So and also, here we go. I also feel and think, it's just a thought actually, that I need to earn my right to be in those circles.
Ah.
Case in point, there's this guy over in Westlake who he's over at parties all the time, and I'd love to be friends with him because he's the guy that's doing the things that I want to do. He's got the private jet. He's got houses galore. He goes to the White House for things, whatever. And when I talk to him, I don't want to say, I find myself not even wanting to speak because I'm there to learn and to grow. And I also think that I don't really have much that I can teach him because he's so advanced. So I find that I need to earn it. And that could be a limiting belief. I don't know.
Yeah.
So it's like stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah. Well, and I guarantee you are not the only person that feels like that.
So what do we do?
So often. I mean, that is one of the biggest pieces that prevents us from achieving higher levels of success. We feel like we have to earn the success before we can be in the room with success or somebody that resembles success to us. Going back to the kind of the framework that we talked about before, what belief do you need to hold about you, about your capabilities, and about him that would change the way that you show up in those interactions? And you can answer that here or not.
To at least give myself a shot, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Why are you worthy? What have you done? You are. You 100% are, Greg.
Yeah. No, if I were to write down a list, I'd come up with a pretty long list.
I'm sure. I could spout off probably a dozen right now, too.
Oh, stop.
But focusing on those, because we have this negativity bias that we automatically go to about ourselves. Why am I not good enough? Why am I not worthy? Often it stems from childhood. When we're younger than 9 years old, often 7. Things that we interpreted at that time to mean that we weren't good enough for something. And so we're programmed, most of us are programmed to not think that we belong in those circles. But it's flipping it on its head. It's, okay, why do I belong there? What can I contribute? Even if that contribution, how many people do you know that are in positions that don't enjoy mentoring?
They do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe some of that worth is I'm an open book. I'm intelligent. I will actually act upon the things that I was just given the grace of having the information given to me. What mentor would not want to create that bigger contribution by sharing information, and by you not being in the room, that's actually doing them a disservice because they're not able to share it with an open receptacle who's actually going to act upon the instructions that they give.
And I think going back to your point about the power of journaling, well, Jim Quick, he posted something the other day talking about the 3 things that we should all touch upon every single day: spiritual, physical, and then I forget what the third one was, but under spiritual, I think it was, perhaps, journaling was one of the few things he had on that little tiny list. Journaling, because it helps you unpack your subconscious. There's no doubt. And I bet if I took time to write about that experience, that I would kind of unravel those thoughts and then come up with a game plan. Because we get to write our own story at the end of the day. And we are definitely one, just like we are one with nature, I also have the belief that we are one with a pen and paper.
Yes.
Because, when you write down your goals, you're 80% more likely to achieve them.
Yeah.
Right? We talked about this. When you write things down, you're 70% more likely to remember them. There's so much power with this. Again, simple. How simple is this?
Very.
Writing. And how much power is it?
Yeah. And
it's crazy.
Many people overcomplicate that.
Yeah. Right. Where's it going with that? I don't know. But it's great. It's fired up. We got to take time to do the simple things. Keep it simple.
Keep it simple.
That old adage that we've heard since we were kids. Keep it simple, silly. I'm going to change that word. Nobody likes to be called stupid.
No. To that point,
yeah.
How do we speak to ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
What labels am I giving to myself? Am I calling myself stupid? Am I calling myself intelligent? Am I calling myself I'm not good enough? Or am I saying I am deserving of this?
LynAnn. Okay. I've read probably close to 1,000 books. YouTube is full of motivational stuff. Tony Robbins, 10X, Grant Cardone, whatever. Okay. I'm plugged in to that ecosystem big time. 2020. Well, let me backtrack a little bit. When I was in college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And up until college, I've never read a book fully.
Oh, wow.
Well, maybe 2 when I was in the military. 2.
Okay.
My first book ever when I was out of high school. I read my first book head to toe. I scathed all the way through grade school. And when I was in college, I didn't know what I was going to do, so I just picked up another book out of nowhere just because I kind of liked it. I remember I liked it, and then all of a sudden, boom, it opened up the floodgates. It was Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Okay? And then I started reading book after book after book, and then applying everything, and it had this huge buildup in my life. I started doing what they said to do in the books, and then everything came true. My spiritual life was on point. My business was it was awesome. It was great. I felt super proud of myself. And then enter the woman. A woman. Right? It all made sense. Everything was like ding, 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 back to back. I'm like, woo, I'm crushing it. What's up? And then everything gone at the blink of an eye. So someone with the foundation of all this positivity and mindset and whatever, I found myself saying things like, yeah, but, or what's the point? Despite all that stuff, all that uppity stuff, that huge explosion took me down. So, this is where I was going with this. It was hard for me to choose to have the positive self-talk. Very hard. And I was making excuses for myself. So what do we do in cases like that? What do we do? What's the principle or the lesson out of something like that?
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. Because that was a hard time for all of us. Or, well, I won't say everybody. Most people really struggled during 2020. Most people have had other challenges, maybe to that level, maybe worse, maybe not quite as bad, but we go through ups and downs all the time. So you brought up a really good point, and thank you for sharing this, because I think this is something that a lot of people struggle with and they don't talk about it. I found it really difficult to want to go to self-talk. I've been there too. What was it that changed it? of when you finally said, okay, I've had enough of this. I'm going to hold myself accountable, or I'm going to focus on these things. What caused that shift?
An upward or downward direction?
Upward.
Rock bottom.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. What was it about hitting rock bottom, of however you would classify rock bottom, that made you say, okay, let me guess, you probably felt like, okay, I've got two choices, right? Either I figure out how to get the heck out of this, and there's got to be a better way, or it's over.
You know what I think it really was? Taking time to actually process emotion. Because I think that I'm personally really good at masking them and movement and moving and productivity and all that stuff. And I think what I was doing to myself was lying to myself. Instead of self-talk, it was self-lies. Like, oh, because I read all these books, because I've done this in my life and I've went through this, whatever, that I'm going to be good in this experience.
That I should be.
Yeah.
Those darn shoulds. I tell you.
Yeah. And it's not true. No matter what. Like, you're a human. And to remember that, it's a hard thing to remember and a hard thing to face.
Yeah.
It hurts.
It does.
It sucks.
It does.
Yeah.
And it all comes back to that power of choice. Every day we have a choice. Am I going to, choose the lies, the self-destructive thought patterns, or am I going to choose the truth and reminding myself of the things that will get me to where I want to be? In my personal faith, it's, am I going to choose the truth because I believe that Jesus Christ told me that I am worthy, that I am blessed, that I am loved, that I am all of these amazing things? But the lies of the enemy are so much louder sometimes. And especially when we're maybe not quite to rock bottom, but almost there, they can be really loud.
Yes.
And that's when the shoulds get really, really loud.
And then going back to, what was the thing we said at the beginning of this? First, starts with self.
Yeah.
Yeah. Taking time, intentional time, you use the word intentional, right? To recognize whatever it is that needs to be recognized. As simple as that sounds. And then coming up with a game plan. The self-healing strategy, for example. Which is hard to do as a guy, because then you got to admit that you're hurt. Vulnerability is a mother. You know what I'm saying? That's a tough one.
It is.
Yeah. But it's all choice. You can do it, is the end of the story.
That is.
The moral of the story, rather.
Yeah.
You can do it.
And absolutely. Anybody can, no matter where you're at, whatever spot you're facing, whatever challenge, whatever hardship, there's always another way out. And sometimes when we're in those really difficult places, it's almost like we get tunnel vision. And all of a sudden it feels like, even though we have hundreds or thousands of choices and maybe different paths that we could take, for some reason it feels like there might only be one or maybe two. And that can be really hard to get out of. Try not to cough. For example, just personal story, when I was in healthcare administration, I had just started a new position. I was a director of a service line, and a couple weeks into that position, come into work one day, and there's police tape everywhere. The entire workplace just feels super heavy. Like, you just really dark, didn't know what was going on. Walk into leadership meeting and find out that one of our physicians had actually jumped off of the parking garage, committed suicide. So you can imagine how everybody is in there just reeling, wondering what anyone could have done, what was going on, what had happened. And there were a series of events that happened shortly thereafter that had caused a couple of my other physicians to start to question if they were really supposed to stay in medicine. I didn't sign up for this. I'm not hitting my goals. I'm losing my family. This is really hard. And the two specific physicians I'm talking about are former military. One had operated in battle without anesthesia on a patient. It's not like they weren't resilient. And at that same time, I was finding myself staying at work later and later, coming in earlier and earlier, avoiding things at home, working to navigate through just all of those challenges, and starting to kind of get sucked into that pattern of, okay, well, I'm seeing all of these people around me struggle with not calling it burnout, but burnout. It's, well, I don't have the energy anymore. I'm exhausted when I go to bed. I'm exhausted when I wake up. I used to really care, but now I kind of don't. Or I don't care as much. Or the little things are just really starting to drive me crazy. And you start getting sucked into that pattern of thought, of those negative little lies. I don't care. I don't this. It doesn't matter. I'm frustrated. Well, it's their fault. It's, lie after lie after lie, which may seem like reality at the time because we justify things to ourselves, right? Feeling like I don't have control over changing this. For me, it was going into listening to those little lies, justifying it, and then watching my marriage fall apart. And I remember thinking, there were times where it was actually said, like, you're not lovable, you're not attractive, you're not this, you're not that. And I internalized those to also, and pulled them into the workplace. Okay, you're not lovable means you're not good enough. What more can I do? What more can I give at work so that I can prove that I'm worthy of something? And I kind of started comparing and contrasting what I was going through with, my team. Nobody knew. Everybody thought that I had this picture perfect life because I was really good at masking it. Really good at making sure everybody knew that everything was great and that I was the go-to person that they could trust to get anything done that they needed to. But as I saw, coming off of that physician committing suicide and then two of my other docs wondering if they were going to continue working in medicine, I had to get really real with myself too. And I'm like, okay, I'm seeing myself in all of these patterns. And if I can't help me, how do I help them? So I started doing what you did. I started reading all of the books, going through all of the programs, doing all of the things. And I realized that it all came down to I kept choosing to repeat the lies over and over instead of choosing to look at and focus on the truth. So I started writing it down. It's like, why am I worthy? Why am I good enough? What have I done in the past that makes me feel like I deserve this position, or that I can actually help these people, or that I can overcome what I'm in? And I started to look to what had other people done? How had they overcome challenges? How had they gone through, ups and downs of business or personal relationships or life or whatever? And it started to sink in that, okay, first and foremost, I have to believe it's possible. I have to believe that something better is possible, that change is possible. Change of myself, change of my situation, change of interactions with people. And from there, it's, okay, what do I need to focus on to get there? What emotions do I need to create internally? And then what actions do I need to take to be able to come out of this? Some of it was honestly just practicing the things that I told myself are important. I'm going to go to the gym because I feel better about myself when I do. I'm going to go to the gym because I can more readily emotionally regulate. I have better outcomes in conversations when I just did a workout or getting my sleep or, doing anything that I say that I need to be doing. And really dissecting how is what I'm doing, who I'm being, and how I'm being playing into the experience of life that I'm having.
So what did it do for you once you started tapping into that?
It changed everything.
How?
I started seeing more possibility rather than limitations. I started seeing, okay, everything in my world I've created. Not because, so-and-so did something or, situations totally outside of my control impacted me, but it was because of the way that I was interpreting it. It was the meaning that I was giving to those situations. And it was what I chose to do with it. There were people in the same position, same environmental challenges, same policy challenges, same staffing issues, same, every issue that we were facing. They were happy. They had great relationships. They were energized at the end of the day. Why weren't we? So you talk about the power of choice. Every day we have a choice, or we get the opportunity to choose. What am I going to focus on? How am I going to feel? And what do I need to do to be able to feel the way that I want to so that I can create the actions and the outcomes that are necessary to really get me into my true goals?
Yeah. Whoa. Yeah. So why? Why live like that? Or what does it mean?
Why live like what?
Like goal oriented and positive. Because you can have somebody thinking this. What's the point?
Oh, yeah.
Why do all this work? What's the point if this is just going to happen? Right? But then all of a sudden they start to try, and all of a sudden they start to win. Ultimately, why is it that we do this? Why do people want success? Is it just to procure a feeling? Or is there something different? Is there something bigger than that?
Depends on how you define success.
Hmm.
Everybody defines it differently, but so few people actually think about what it means for them. We get sucked into this vortex of, okay, success means having the private jet, having all of the houses, having all of the financial resources that I want. But what people often forget to include in that calculus is, what about my personal health? What about my fitness?
Mm-hmm.
What type of relationships do I want to hold, have, keep? What else really matters? So to that, first, identify what success really means to you.
Yeah. Can I take the mic just for a second here? Okay, cool. So 2 weeks ago, I went on a plant medicine journey. Okay. And despite what many may think, it was actually a very quiet experience. There was five other people in the room. And as soon as the medicine was administered, you could hear a cricket because everybody was going internal, right? Mm-hmm. I pulled out this notepad and I sat on a couch with my headphones in and wrote for 3.5 hours. And one of the things that I wrote, for some reason, I contrasted it to like medieval times when there was tons of princes and kings and queens and stuff. I have no idea why, but it's happened. And the revelation I came upon was that comparison is extremely destructive. And right now in society, it's so easy to compare yourself. The whole goal of a king is to simply be the king, no matter how big his kingdom is. And you talked about clarity in the beginning of this. Having clarity of what values you want to exude or exemplify in your kingdom. You are the kingdom. It could just be you, and you could be alone. But what is it like inside, like your internal, your spirit, right? It could be that small. Your kingdom could be you and your spirit, right? Who are you? Nothing else really matters until you have clarity on what that is, what you stand for, what brings you joy. And then go from there. But it all starts with you. Be the king. be the person.
Yeah.
Because comparison will lead you to buying the big house when you don't need it. It'll lead you to doing things to impress other people when it doesn't make sense to do that.
And it just leaves you empty.
Yeah, and all those things are outcome oriented, where being is a constant practice.
Yes.
It's a presence. When you think of outcomes, it's typically a dead end road, and then you got to move the mountain and all that other stuff. Nothing wrong with goal setting and having fun, gamifying it.
Sure.
More importantly, though, it's the presence that matters and who you are. That's what I came up with on that journey.
Presence that matters, who you are, and what you can choose to continuously do. But more so, who you choose to continuously be.
Mm-hmm.
Because who we be drives what we do. And what we do brings the outcomes that we get.
That's right. And it makes things fun,
It does.
doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And to answer your previous question of why people, like, if they think something of, why would I even try? Go back to that belief. Why do you believe it's not possible, or why do you believe that you don't deserve it? And then why do you believe you do? Or what needs to change so that you could believe that you do? But it starts with choice. Do I want to choose to stay where I am? Or do I want to choose to find a better path?
And then you can use the power of negative thinking. What happens if you don't? What happens if you don't? That's negative thinking. And it's used in a positive direction.
Yes.
If I don't start doing this, what is the rest of your years really going to look like?
Who else does it hurt?
Powerful question. Yeah, for sure.
Who would be missing out on something if I don't do this? Back to the billionaires thought process. What will my children or my grandchildren or my grandchildren's children not get to experience because I didn't take that action?
Bingo. Whoa. LynAnn, how do people get a hold of you?
Email is great, or LinkedIn.
What's your email? We're going to post it also.
Okay, sure. LynAnn at healthcareelevation.com.
LynAnn.
Yes.
At Healthcare Innovation.
Elevation.
Elevation. I like it. Elevation.
Yes.
Elevate. Get lifted. .com.
Yes.
You on Instagram?
Some.
A little bit?
At LynAnn Weaver.
Okay.
Same it for LinkedIn.
And then you're going to drop a podcast here in a couple. You're kicking it off soon, right?
Yeah.
What's the name? You got a name? No.
It will likely be High Performance Healthcare, and it's highlighting the stories, strategies, and tools that the most successful physicians and healthcare leaders have used to reach pinnacle levels of success.
Dang. That's fired up. Keep your eye out for that one, folks. That's going to be awesome. I want to listen to that one. I want to know what the pros are doing. It's great.
Yeah.
Shoot. Wow. So, LynAnn, this is one question. Let's play a little fun game.
Okay.
Actually, we're not done yet, folks, because you want to get to know LynAnn a little bit better, don't you? So do I. We're going to play a little speed round.
Okay.
First thing that comes to your mind. You ready?
Yeah.
You ready? The game show has begun. Best date spot in Austin.
Best day spot?
Date
spot. Ooh. I'm just now getting back into the dating game, so I really don't know how to answer that question. If you have any recommendations, I would love to hear them.
Plenty. Just kidding. Not much. God. Mount Bonnell.
Love Mount Bonnell.
Yeah. You'll walk up there, talk, look at the view. It's great. It's great. Best seafood restaurant in Austin.
Open for recommendations.
LynAnn.
I just moved here, so.
What's your most memorable Christmas present that you've ever got?
Most memorable Christmas.
That you just freaked out.
The first one that just came to mind is hilarious. It's actually tires for my car. So, yeah. Know that you've stepped into adulthood. I think I was probably 22 or something like that. And I needed all new tires for my car. And my parents bought me tires for Christmas.
Well, not for nothing. Tires ain't cheap. So
no, like $1,800
Dang.
back in the day.
What, did you have a jacked up pickup truck?
No, just
$1,800.
My dad has this whole thing about safety and getting the best for, yeah.
$1,800 for tires?
That's what he told me. I don't know.
Yo, you're not for nothing. I'm not gonna call your dad a liar here. That sounds crazy. Well, good for him. Oh my God, those must be. Are they still around, those tires? They better for $1,800.
I sold the car several years ago. So I don't know.
That's so.
2 vehicles later.
And then, as far as your memorable travel experience, where did you go?
Prague.
What made that so memorable?
I think several things. One, it was very impromptu. I'm a very structured, very planned out person. And me and one of my girlfriends planned this trip 2 weeks before we left. Bought the flights, did everything. One of my other friends who had just come from there or had visited within the last year or two kind of gave us this roadmap of everywhere to go. And then so I have, one of my best friends with me. One of my other friends kind of planned the trip. So it was almost like he was with us, even though he wasn't. And then the third was just the ambiance and the culture and the history. We did bike tours through Old and New Prague, or East and West.
That sounds fun.
It was amazing. Had the best tour guide, and he pointed out a lot of places to stop by that mostly just the locals knew about. So we went and visited a bunch of those.
Cool.
And they were like hole in the wall places. And we went into one where it was the oldest brewery in Prague. And we walk in, sit down, and within 30 seconds of sitting down, somebody comes over and hands us this, an entire stein of beer. And we're like, great. How did you know what we want? And he's like, we only have one beer. And we're like, cool, we'll take that. And there's an accordion player playing music, which accordion music typically is not my jam, but in that setting, it was just awesome. And so everybody's like cheersing and just really, really jovial. And then the accordion player stops playing, goes on a 10-minute break, and it goes dead silent. And all you hear is like forks and knives clanking on the silverware or on the plates, and nobody's talking. And it feels like the most stuffy 5-star restaurant you've ever been into, but not one of the fun ones.
Yeah.
Like the one that you're going, okay, how do I get out of here? Check, please. And then the accordion player comes back in, like breaks through this doorway, presses the accordion together, screams something, and other language, and starts playing again. And then it's just like this crazy energetic change. And I went, that is such a great example of how one person can completely change the environment. I mean, it was night and day difference. But it was just like all of these fun experiences like that tied together. And we met some amazing people and had some great food, and just, I don't know, it was just like this amazing, really quick experience that I want to relive.
I'm going to title that story, The Story of the Accordion.
The Story of the Accordion.
I like that. Wow. Well, folks, LynAnn, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you so much for having me.
What a ride that was. Goodness gracious. Got after it. Folks, I hope you found this super helpful and you can apply some of these principles and discussions to your lives to live the ultimate life. That's what this podcast is all about. What does elite mean? It means abundance. It means joy. It means being the best version of yourself. LynAnn, you definitely hit all the marks when it comes to our ideal guest here. So keep up the great work. My name is Greg Carlson, your host of the Elite League Podcast. Till next time, everybody, and most importantly, stay fired up. Cheers.